A Category 5 hurricane was barreling down on our vacation island. My own family fled in their SUV, leaving me behind to face the storm alone. "There's no room," my father said. "We'll come back for you." I was terrified, waiting for the end. But then I heard the sound of a helicopter, and when I looked up, I saw the face of my estranged ex-boyfriend in the cockpit. Before we get into it, I have a quick question for you. What city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that beach house. The family vacation had been my mother's idea. A week of forced togetherness in a rented beach house on a remote, beautiful, and, as it turned out, dangerously exposed barrier island. For the first few days, it was a familiar kind of misery. My parents spent their time doting on my younger brother, the golden child, while I was treated as a sort of glorified camp counselor and an afterthought. It was the story of my life, a dynamic I had long since grown weary of fighting. The first news reports of the tropical storm were easy to ignore. It was a small, distant swirl on the weather map, a problem for another day. But the storm had other plans. It fed on the warm, late summer water of the Gulf, and in the space of 24 hours, it grew from a minor inconvenience into a monster, a Category 5 hurricane named Isabel, and it was heading directly for us. The emergency alerts on our phones began to scream in unison, a chorus of digital panic. The evacuation order was issued, mandatory. The single long bridge that connected our small island to the mainland would be closing to all traffic at 5 p.m. It was 1 p.m. We had 4 hours. Panic erupted in our small beach house, but it was not a unified panic. It was a selfish one. My mother began frantically trying to pack her antique silverware. My father was obsessed with getting his expensive fishing gear into the back of their massive SUV. And my younger brother was having a full-blown tantrum because he couldn't find his iPad. I was the only one doing the practical work, boarding up the windows, packing the emergency kit, trying to instill a sense of organized urgency into their chaos. "We have to go now," I yelled over the rising howl of the wind. "Forget the silverware, Mom. We need to get in the car and go." It was in the garage, amidst the frantic, chaotic mess of their belongings, that the true nature of my family was finally and brutally revealed. The back of their large SUV was packed to the absolute brim. Suitcases, boxes of my mother's antiques, my father's fishing rods, my brother's video game consoles. There was not a single square inch of space left, except for the 3 seats in the front. For my father, my mother, and my brother. I just stared. Where am I supposed to sit?" I asked, my voice a small, disbelieving whisper. My father, a man I had spent my life trying to earn a single scrap of approval from, would not meet my eyes. He just kept rearranging a box in the trunk, his face a mask of grim, cowardly resolve. He said, "Chloe, honey, there's no more room. The car is overloaded as it is." "What?" I said, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "What are you talking about? Take out the stupid fishing rods. Take out Mom's boxes. We have to leave."
"There's no time," he snapped, his voice finally rising. "We have to get your brother to safety. He's just a child." He then looked at me, his eyes full of a strange, cold practicality. "You are a strong, capable young woman. You will be fine here. Just stay in the main bathroom, away from the windows. We'll get across the bridge. We'll drop your brother off with your aunt on the mainland. And then," he said, the lie so blatant, so absolute it was almost impressive, "we will come right back for you. I promise." I looked at him, at my mother who was already buckling my brother into his seat, her face turned away from me, and I knew. They were not coming back. They were leaving me here to die. The bridge would be closed, the storm would hit, and I would be alone. They were saving themselves, and their favorite child. I didn't plead, I didn't cry. I was too shocked for that. I just stood there, in the wind-whipped garage of that rented beach house, and I watched as my father got into the driver's seat. He didn't look at me as he backed the car out of the driveway. He just drove. He drove away, leaving me behind, a final inconvenient piece of baggage he had decided to jettison. I stood on that porch, the wind tearing at my hair, and I watched as my family, my entire world, disappeared down the road, a small dark speck against a sky that was now the color of a deep and angry bruise. I was completely and utterly alone, abandoned to the mercy of a monstrous, world-ending storm. I thought of my ex-boyfriend, Owen, a Coast Guard rescue pilot I hadn't spoken to in 6 months after our own painful breakup. I wondered, in a moment of bitter, black irony, who he was out there saving tonight. I had no idea that in the middle of the most dangerous storm of the century, he was already looking for me. The red taillights of my family's SUV disappeared into the rain-swept gloom, a final, fading ember of a life that was now over. I stood on that porch, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and the full, crushing weight of my abandonment settled upon me. It was not a decision made in the heat of the moment. It was a cold, hard, and practical calculation. They had looked at the contents of their lives, and they had decided that a box of antique silverware was more valuable, more worthy of saving than their own daughter. The grief, when it came, was a sharp, physical blow, so intense it almost buckled my knees. But there was no time for tears. The wind, which had been a steady, mournful howl, was now rising in pitch, becoming a high, predatory shriek. The sky was a dark, churning cauldron of gray and a sick, greenish yellow. The storm was here. A strange, cold calm washed over me, the kind of clarity that only comes in the face of absolute, mortal terror. My own heartbreak, my family's betrayal, it was all a distant, unimportant noise. The only thing that mattered now was survival. I spent the next hour in a frantic, focused flurry of activity. I dragged the heavy porch furniture inside, the wicker chairs scraping against the wooden floors. I filled the bathtubs and every pot and pan I could find with fresh water, just as the emergency bulletins had advised. I found the emergency kit I had so carefully packed that morning, the one my mother had told me was overkill, and I brought it to the most central, most protected part of the house, the small, windowless guest bathroom on the ground floor. This was to be my bunker, my world.
The storm hit with the force of a freight train. The first great wave of the storm surge, a towering wall of gray, churning water, crashed over the dunes and obliterated the pristine white beach in an instant. I watched from the living room window as the ocean, my old, beautiful friend, became a monster, its angry, frothing fingers clawing their way up the lawn, swallowing the palm trees whole. The power went out with a sudden, final click, plunging the house into a dim, terrifying twilight. The wind was a living entity now, a screaming banshee wail that seemed to be trying to tear the very boards of the house apart. The windows began to rattle in their frames, a violent, percussive rhythm against the deeper, booming bass of the waves crashing against the foundation. A picture fell from the wall and shattered on the floor. I retreated into my small, windowless bathroom, my heart a frantic, terrified bird in the cage of my ribs. I sat on the cold, tiled floor, the emergency flashlight clutched in my hand, its beam a single, shaky circle of light in the absolute, crushing darkness. And I listened. I listened to the world being torn apart around me, the terrifying crack of a tree splitting in two in the yard, the high-pitched metallic screech of the gutters being ripped from the roof, and the constant, deafening, and all-consuming roar of the hurricane. Meanwhile, 100 miles away on the mainland, in the bright, chaotic, and fluorescent-lit world of the Coast Guard Air Station, my ex-boyfriend, Owen, was fighting a different kind of storm. He was a rescue pilot, and his world was a controlled chaos of weather charts, emergency dispatches, and the roar of helicopter blades. He had heard the evacuation order for our island, and a small, nagging knot of worry had formed in his stomach. He knew my family. He had spent 2 years of his life navigating their particular brand of polite, smiling selfishness. He had made the call, a quick check-in with my father, a man he had never particularly liked. "Robert, it's Owen," he had said over the roar of the hangar. "Just saw the evac order for the island. You guys got out okay, right? Chloe is safe?" My father's voice on the other end of the line had been a perfect performance of relieved fatherly concern. "Yes, of course, son. We're all safe on the mainland. Got out hours ago. It was a close call, though. The bridge was about to close. Thanks for checking on us." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Owen had hung up, but the knot in his stomach had not gone away. It had tightened. Something had felt wrong. The lie had been too easy. He knew my father, and he knew me, and he knew that I, the responsible one, the planner, would have never let my family cut it that close to an evacuation deadline. He had made a choice. It was against protocol. It was dangerous, but it was a choice born of a deep and still very present love. He had decided to do one last, final flyover of the island, a final sweep for any stragglers, before the storm made all air travel impossible. And his flight path, the one he had drawn on the map, was a direct line to the one specific rented beach house where he knew I was supposed to be. Back in the darkness of my bathroom bunker, the worst of the storm seemed to be passing. The constant, deafening roar had softened to a low, angry growl. I thought it might be the eye of the hurricane, a brief, deceptive respite. And in that relative quiet, I heard it. A new sound. A sound that was not the wind. A sound that was not the waves. It was a deep, rhythmic, and impossibly familiar thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of helicopter blades, somehow, impossibly, cutting through the storm. It was a ghost, a hallucination, a sound my terrified, sleep-deprived mind had invented. Rescue was impossible. No one was coming for me. My family had made sure of that. But the sound grew louder, closer, until it was a physical, vibrating presence in the very air around me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my legs weak, and made my way through the dark, debris-strewn living room to a shattered window. I looked up into the gray, swirling chaos of the sky, and I saw it. A Coast Guard rescue helicopter, a brilliant splash of orange and white against the dark, angry sky, was hovering, impossibly, almost suicidally, directly over my house. A powerful, brilliant searchlight cut through the storm, and for a single, blinding moment, it illuminated my face. I was not alone. Someone had come back for me. I stood in the wreckage of the living room, my body frozen, my mind refusing to process the impossible sight in the sky above me. The sound was a physical thing, a deep, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that vibrated through the floorboards, through the soles of my feet, and up into my very bones. A sound that was somehow cutting through the chaotic, deafening roar of the hurricane. It was real. They were real. The brilliant white beam of the searchlight held me in its unwavering gaze, a single, steady point of hope in a world that had dissolved into a maelstrom of wind and water. I saw a figure appear in the open door of the helicopter, a silhouette against the stormy gray sky, and then a line was lowered, and a person, a rescuer in a dark wetsuit and a helmet, began the terrifying, controlled descent towards my crumbling house. The house itself was now an island in a raging, angry sea. The storm surge had completely swallowed the yard, and the churning, debris-filled water was now licking at the porch, the waves crashing against the walls with a series of deep, sickening thuds. I knew it was only a matter of time before the entire structure was compromised. The rescuer landed on the roof with a heavy, practiced thud that I felt more than heard. There was a sound of splintering wood, and then a section of the ceiling in the hallway collapsed inward, and he dropped down into the house, landing in a crouch on the flooded floor, a coil of rope in his hand. He was all business, his face obscured by the visor of his helmet. Ma'am, I'm Petty Officer Evans with the Coast Guard. Are you injured? No, I managed to choke out. I'm okay. Good, he said, his voice a calm, professional bark. We need to get you out of here right now. The structure is failing. He quickly, efficiently wrapped a harness around my torso, the movements sure and practiced. I'm going to clip you to me, he explained. The hoist will take us both up together. Whatever you do, do not look down. Just hold on to me. Do you understand? I just nodded, my body now a puppet in the hands of this strange, faceless angel. He clipped my harness to his own and spoke into his radio. Ascender, ready for hoist. On my mark. He led me to the largest hole in the roof, a place where a massive oak tree had already done his work for him. And then, with a final shout into his radio, we were airborne. The ascent was a terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly surreal experience. One moment I was in the dark, drowning ruin of my life, and the next I was flying. The force of the helicopter's downdraft was a physical blow, a hurricane within the hurricane, and the wind and rain were a blinding, stinging assault. I did as he said. I buried my face in the chest of this stranger, my arms wrapped around him in a death grip, and I held on for dear life.
We were pulled into the loud, vibrating belly of the helicopter. The crew chief, a large, calm man, unclipped us and dragged us into the relative safety of the cabin. The noise was deafening, the entire world a rattling, roaring vibration. The crew chief gave me a thumbs up and a reassuring smile, and then pointed me towards the front, towards the cockpit. I stumbled my way forward, my legs weak and unsteady, and I looked into the cockpit. The pilot, his back to me, was a study in calm, focused control, his hands moving with a steady, practiced grace over the glowing instrument panel. The crew chief must have said something over the headset, because the pilot turned his head to look back at me, to confirm, I assumed, that the rescue was complete. He lifted the visor of his flight helmet, and my world, which had already been shattered once that day, broke all over again in a completely new and infinitely more complicated way. It was Owen, my ex-boyfriend, the man I had loved with my entire soul for 2 years, the man whose heart I had broken 6 months ago, the man whose calls I had stopped returning. He was supposed to be in another state, on another coast, but he was here, flying a helicopter in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane, and he was looking at me. His eyes, those familiar, kind, and beautiful green eyes, were wide with a mixture of a profound, bone-deep relief and a deep, familiar concern that I had no right to see in his face ever again. Our headsets crackled to life. Chloe? His voice was a ghost, a sound I thought I would never hear again, a sound that was now a lifeline in the middle of a storm. You're okay? I just stared, my mind a complete, white blank of disbelief. I couldn't form a word. I just whispered his name. Owen, how? I had a bad feeling, he said, his voice a little shaky, but his hands steady on the controls as he banked the helicopter away from the crumbling remains of my prison. A very bad feeling. Now just sit tight, I'm getting you out of here. I was flying away from the storm, saved by the one man I thought I would never see again. My family, the people who were supposed to love me, had left me to die, and the man whose heart I had broken had just flown into the very heart of that storm to save me. The world I had known yesterday, the people I trusted, the people I resented, the very definition of the word family, was gone, washed away by the storm surge, and I had no idea what new, terrifying, and beautiful world I was now flying into. The flight back to the mainland was a journey through a living nightmare. From the rattling, vibrating belly of the helicopter, I watched the world I had known just that morning be swallowed by a monstrous, churning sea. The beautiful, pristine barrier island was being erased, torn apart by the storm's relentless fury. I saw houses, smaller and less sturdy than the one I had just been in, splinter apart like they were made of matchsticks.
I saw the single, long bridge that led to the mainland buckle and then collapse into the raging water. My family hadn't just left me behind, they had left me with no possible means of escape. And in the cockpit, a few feet away from me, was the one impossible and undeniable reason I was not currently drowning in that same water. Owen. We flew in a silence dictated by the roaring mechanics of the helicopter and the headsets that connected us. I watched the back of his helmet, the steady, professional movements of his hands on the controls, and my mind was a chaotic, screaming mess of 1,000 unanswerable questions. Why was he here? How had he known? We finally landed at the Coast Guard air station on the mainland. It was a world of controlled, organized chaos. Men and women in uniform were running, shouting, coordinating a dozen different rescue missions. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and the raw electric energy of a crisis in full swing. The moment we touched down, I was whisked away by a kind-faced medic who wrapped me in a thick, warm blanket and sat me down in a quiet corner of the hangar, pressing a steaming hot cup of coffee into my trembling hands. I watched as Owen went through his post-flight debrief with his commanding officer. He was no longer my Owen, the man I had loved. He was a professional, a soldier, his face a grim, serious mask as he detailed the conditions of our flight. I felt like an intruder, a civilian who had stumbled into a world of heroes she did not understand. After what felt like an eternity, he was finally done. He walked over to me, his flight suit soaked, his face etched with a profound exhaustion I had never seen before. He had taken off his helmet, and his familiar, kind green eyes were full of a deep and deeply complicated concern. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hey," I whispered back. You saved my life." The words felt small, inadequate, a pathetic little pebble of a statement in the face of the mountain of what he had just done. "It's my job," he said, with a small, tired shrug. "No, it's not," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "Your job is to rescue people who are stranded, not to fly into the heart of a Category 5 hurricane on a suicide mission for your ex-girlfriend who broke your heart and hasn't spoken to you in 6 months." I looked at him, my own eyes now filling with tears. "How, Owen? How did you even know I was still there?" He sat down in the chair opposite me, running a weary hand over his face. "I had a bad feeling, Chloe. A really bad feeling. When I heard the evac order for the island, I knew your family was supposed to be there. So I called your dad, just to make sure you had all gotten out safely." He looked at me and his eyes were full of a sad, angry pity. "He lied to me, Chloe. Your father." His voice was as calm and as clear as a bell. "He told me you had all evacuated hours ago. He said you were all safe and sound on the mainland, staying with your aunt. He thanked me for my concern. He was a perfect, believable, and utterly convincing liar." The final, ugly piece of the puzzle slammed into place. My father hadn't just made a selfish, panicked decision. He had actively and coldly constructed a lie to cover it up, a lie that would have ensured no one would ever come looking for me. I hung up the phone, but I couldn't shake it. It felt wrong. I know your dad, and I know you. You are the most responsible, organized person I have ever met. You would never have let them cut it that close to an evacuation deadline. The lie, it was too smooth, too easy. He shook his head. "So I did something stupid. My CO had grounded all flights. The storm was too dangerous. But I couldn't get your face out of my head. I took the bird up for one last, unauthorized reconnaissance flight." He gave me a small, wry, and deeply tired smile. "I'm probably going to lose my wings for this, but," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I had to be sure." I just stared at him, my mind unable to process the sheer, staggering scale of it all. The man who was my father, my own blood, had calmly and deliberately left me to die and had constructed a lie to ensure my death would be a quiet, private affair. And this man, the man that I had thrown away, had been willing to risk his entire career, his entire future, his very life, on the slim, desperate chance that my father was a liar.
It was in that moment of terrible, brilliant clarity that a television in the corner of the hangar, which had been playing the non-stop news coverage of the storm, caught my eye. The reporter was live, broadcasting from one of the crowded mainland evacuation shelters. And on the screen, wrapped in emergency blankets, their faces a perfect performance of tragic concern, were my parents. "It was just horrible," my mother was weeping to the camera. My father's arm wrapped protectively around her. "We were all so worried about our oldest daughter, Chloe. She was supposed to meet us at the bridge, but we lost contact in the chaos. The lines were dead. We just have to pray," she said, her voice breaking with a perfect, false sob, "that she somehow made it out on her own." I watched my mother lie, with a breathtaking ease to the entire world. She was not just a woman who had abandoned her child. She was already building the story, the alibi, the narrative that would paint them as the tragic, worried parents of a lost daughter. They thought I was dead, a sad, forgotten victim of a terrible storm. They had no idea I had survived. They had no idea I was sitting in a warm, dry hangar 100 miles away. They had no idea I had a witness. And they had no idea that the real storm, the one of pure, righteous, and inescapable consequence, was just about to make landfall. I sat there on the hard, plastic chair in the noisy hangar, the warmth of the coffee cup a small, forgotten thing in my cold hands. On the television screen, my mother's face, a perfect, tragic mask of a grieving parent, was telling a beautiful, monstrous lie to the entire world. She was a brilliant actress. My father stood beside her, his arm wrapped around her, his own face a picture of stoic, paternal sorrow. They were a portrait of parental love and worry. They were also murderers, in their own cold, careless way. They had murdered the daughter they thought was gone. The anger that rose in me was so pure, so absolute, it was a clarifying force. The grief, the shock, the heartbreak, it all burned away, leaving behind a single, diamond-hard point of purpose. I looked at Owen. He was watching the television, his own face a mask of quiet, profound disgust. He had risked his life, his career, his very being on a gut feeling that these two people were liars, and now he was watching them prove him right on national television. "They're not just going to get away with this," I said, my voice no longer a whisper. It was a low, steady, and dangerous thing, a voice I did not recognize as my own. "I will not let them." "What do you want to do?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine, full of a quiet, unwavering support. My plan formed in an instant, a perfect, brutal, and beautifully simple strategy. "You're a hero, right? A Coast Guard rescue pilot who just flew into the eye of a hurricane to save a stranded civilian. I bet that reporter over there," I nodded towards the television, "would love to get an exclusive interview with a hero like that." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Owen's tired face. He understood instantly. "I think you might be right," he said. He made the call, not to the news station, but to his own base's public affairs officer. He explained the situation in the calm, clipped, and authoritative language of a pilot. He told them about his unauthorized rescue mission. He told them about the civilian he had pulled from the island. And he told them that the parents of that same civilian were at that very moment live on the air, spinning a false and damnatory story. The wheels of a different kind of machine, one of public relations and media justice, began to turn. 10 minutes later, the reporter on the television, a young woman with an ambitious glint in her eye, was interrupted by her producer speaking into her earpiece. I watched as her expression shifted from one of sympathetic concern to a look of pure, predatory excitement. She had just been handed the biggest story of her career. "Mr. and Mrs. Prescott," she began, her voice now with a new sharp edge as she turned back to my parents.
We are just getting some incredible breaking news into our studio right now. It seems there has been a miracle. My parents looked at her, their faces a picture of confused hope. We have just received a confirmed report from a Coast Guard air station on the mainland, the reporter continued, her eyes fixed on them. A pilot on a heroic and unsanctioned final reconnaissance flight has just successfully rescued a single female survivor from the very island you were just telling us about. The color began to drain from my father's face. My mother's hand, which had been clutching her chest in a gesture of sorrow, froze in place. The pilot's name is Lieutenant Owen Hayes, the reporter said, reading from her phone, and the name of the woman he rescued, the woman who is, according to the Coast Guard, safe and sound and very much alive, is your daughter, Chloe. The silence in the evacuation shelter was, I imagined, absolute. The camera zoomed in on my parents' faces. I watched as their perfect, tragic performance crumbled into a ruin of pure, abject horror. They were not relieved. They were not joyful. They were trapped. Their lie, their beautiful, perfect alibi, had just been publicly, spectacularly, and completely annihilated. The reporter, sensing blood in the water, went in for the kill. "Sir," she said to my father, her voice now a sharp, accusatory instrument, "you told me just moments ago that you had lost contact with your daughter in the chaos. But the Coast Guard pilot is reporting that he spoke to you himself just hours ago, and that you personally assured him that your daughter was already safely off the island with you. Can you explain that discrepancy for us?" My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked at my mother, whose own face was a mask of pure, panicked terror. They had been caught, in front of the entire world. They were not grieving parents. They were liars. They were villains. I didn't watch anymore. I stood up and turned off the television, plunging our small corner of the hangar into a quiet, peaceful darkness. The battle was over. Their public execution was complete. The weeks that followed were a quiet, painful, and necessary severing. I did not speak to my parents again. There were, of course, frantic, hysterical voicemails. There were letters filled with pathetic, self-serving excuses. I did not listen to them. I did not read them. They were ghosts from another life. My old life, the one where I had been the forgotten, unappreciated daughter, was gone, washed away by the storm. It's been a year now. Owen did not lose his wings. In fact, his unauthorized rescue mission made him a national hero. And the bad feeling he had, the one that had made him break the rules to come and find me, we both decided that was a feeling worth listening to. We are together now, our relationship rebuilt on a foundation of a trust so profound and so absolute, it was forged in the heart of a hurricane.
We live in a small house by the sea, not on a barrier island, but on a quiet, protected cove. Some mornings I watch the Coast Guard helicopters fly their practice routes over the water, and I think about that day. I think about the family that left me behind, and the man who flew into a storm to bring me home. My revenge wasn't in their downfall. It was in my own beautiful and hard-won peace. I had survived the storm, and in doing so, had finally, truly found my safe harbor. An absolutely unbelievable story of survival and a rescue that came from the most unexpected place. What do you think of the way Chloe exposed her parents' lie on live television? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were on the edge of your seat during this incredible story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of karma and survival. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.